Hello again, it's Mr. Strickland with part 2 of Marvin of the Great North Woods. Remember, Marvin left his city because of the great pandemic there and went off to a logging camp. And he just arrived and saw some wild men, huge beards, dancing. Mr. Murray took Marvin to the small office where he would work and sleep. In Duluth, Marvin had to share a bedroom with his two younger sisters and all their dolls and toys, but this room was all his, and he liked it. A bed with a bearskin on it sat across from a wood stove. Nearby, wood was stacked neatly. The big desk had cubby holes for papers, envelopes, glue pots, and blotter strips, and on the desk there were blots of paper and a big black ledger. There were pencils in a blue glass jar as well as an inkwell. Marvin hoped that somewhere there would be a good pen, a fountain pen. In addition to keeping the payroll, Mr. Murray said, "You have another job. The first bell in the morning is at 4 o'clock, second bell at 4:15, third bell is at 4:20. By 4:25, if any jack is still in the sack, he's en retard, late. So, you, son, are the fourth bell. Starting tomorrow, you go into the bunkhouse and wake les en retards." "How?" "You tap them on the shoulder, give them a shake, scream in their ear if you have to." Then Mr. Murray said good night, and Marvin was alone again. It seemed to Marvin he had just crawled under the bearskin when he heard the first bell. The fire was out and the room was cold and dark. He lit the kerosene lamp and pulled on his double thick long underwear, 2 pairs of socks, 2 pairs of knickers, and 2 sweaters. Then he put on his cut-down overcoat. After the second bell, Marvin heard the jacks heading towards the eating hall. It was nearly time for his first job. He ran through the cold morning darkness to the bunkhouse, peeked in, and counted 5 huge lumps in the shadows. 5 jacks in the sacks. Marvin waited just inside the door. At the third bell, Marvin was relieved to see 2 jacks climb out of bed. He thought there must be a brooch, a Hebrew blessing for something like this. His father knew all sorts of brooches. Blessings for seeing the sunrise, blessings for the first blossom of spring. Was there a brooch for a rising lumberjack? If he said a brooch, maybe the other 3 would get up on their own. One lump stirred, then another. They grunted, rolled, climbed out from under the covers. Their huge shadows slid across the ceiling. One jack was still in the sack. Marvin took a deep breath, walked bravely over to the bed, reached out, and tapped the jack's shoulders. It was like poking a gigantic boulder. The jack's beard ran right into his long, scraggly hair. Marvin couldn't even find an ear to shout into. He cupped his hands around his mouth and leaned forward. "Up!" The jack grunted and muttered something in French. "Get up!" Marvin pleaded. Another jack pulled on his boots, boomed, "Lève-toi, Jean-Louis, lève-toi," and shuffled out the door. "Lève-toi, Jean-Louis, lève-toi," Marvin repeated. Jean-Louis opened one eye. He glittered like a blue star beneath his thick black eyebrow. He squinted, as if trying to make out the shape in front of him, then blinked and sat up. "Bonjour," Marvin whispered. "Qu'est-ce tu nom? I don't speak French. Just bonjour, derrière, and lève-toi." "That's all? No more?" The man opened his eyes wide now. "So, what is your name?" Marvin. Ah, Marvin, Jean Louis repeated, as if tasting the sound of his name. Will you get up? Marvin asked anxiously. Jean Louis growled and fixed him in the hard blue squint of one eye. Please, Marvin stood straight and tried not to tremble. Jean Louis grunted, swung his feet from beneath the covers. They were as big as skillets, and one of his huge toenails was bruised black and blue. Marvin tried not to stare. Marvin and Jean Louis were the last to arrive at the breakfast table. The only sounds were those of chewing and the clinks of forks and knives against the plates. At each place there were 3 sacks of flapjacks, 1 big steak, 8 strips of bacon, and a bowl of oatmeal. In the middle of the table were bowls of potatoes and beans with molasses, platters with pies and cakes, blue jugs filled with tea, coffee, and milk. Marvin stared at the food in dismay. It's not kosher, he thought. In Marvin's house, it was against ancient Hebrew law to eat dairy products and meat together. And never, ever did a Jew eat bacon. Marvin came to a quick decision. One day, he would eat the flapjacks and oatmeal with milk. The next day, he would eat the steak and the oatmeal without milk, and never the bacon. After breakfast, as they did every morning, the Jacks went to the tool house to get their saws and axes. Then, wearing snowshoes and pulling huge sleds piled with equipment, they made their way into the great woods where they would work all day. Marvin went directly to his office after breakfast. Mr. Murray was already there, setting out Marvin's work. A fresh pot of ink was thawing and a bowl of hot water on the wood stove. There were 2 boxes on the desk filled with scraps of paper. Cord chits, Mr. Murray said. The Jacks are paid according to the number of cords they cut in a pay period, 2 weeks. You figure it out. I'm no good as a bookkeeper, and I have enough other things to do around here. Each chit should have a Jack's name, or, if he can't write, his symbol. His symbol? Marvin asked weakly. Yes, Jean Louis's is a thumbprint. He's one. He held up a small piece of paper with a thumbprint on it, the size of a baby's fist. Marvin blinked. It was all very confusing. Sometimes 2 names were on one chit. These were called doublés. They were even some triplets. This meant more calculations, and sometimes chits were in the wrong pay period box. Marvin sat staring at the scraps. There is no system, he muttered. Where to begin? His mother always made a list when she had many things to do. So first Marvin listed the Jacks' names alphabetically and noted the proper symbol for those who could not write. Then he listed the dates of a single pay period, coded each chit with the dates, and with a ruler made a chart. By the end of the morning, Marvin had a system and knew the name or symbol for each man. There were many chits with a huge thumbprint of Jean Louis. Okay, that is the end of part 2. So hopefully we will see you again for part 3.